live.
It's 5:05 and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We've got a couple of different stories this morning in and around the Charlotte Metro. They all involve Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden. We start off with a letter yesterday sent by the North Carolina General Assembly to McFadden requesting him to appear in front of the House Oversight Committee. The letter from Representative Jake Johnson, Representative Brendan Jones, and Representative Harry Warner reads as follows. Dear Sheriff McFadden, pursuant to General Statute 120-14, the House Oversight Committee requests your appearance to testify on January the 22nd, 2026 at 9 p.m. in the Legislative Building Auditorium. In your role as sheriff, please be prepared to discuss your office's role in ensuring the public safety throughout the city of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, including on the Charlotte area transportation system. Please also be prepared to discuss strategic plans, including spending, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and other topics as appropriate. It then goes on to say, please read this letter carefully to ensure that you comply with all hearing requirements and that you understand your rights as a witness. That letter was sent yesterday from Lawmakers to Sheriff McFadden in Mecklenburg County, requesting him in front of the House Oversight Committee. A couple of things to note in that. Obviously, the Charlotte area transportation system, that is CATS, the entity that is responsible for operating the Charlotte Light Rail, which had two major news stories in 2025. One, the horrific murder of Irina Zarutska on the Charlotte Light Rail during the summer, and then back just about a month or so ago, another stabbing on the light rail by a twice-deported illegal immigrant in the United States who was already banned from taking advantage of light rail services. However, he was on the light rail, drunk and disorderly, and decided to stab another passenger in the chest. Those have been two of the major CATS, Charlotte area transportation system, and light rail stories over the last couple of months, or I should say over the last year, more accurate description on that, and part of the reason why McFadden has been summoned in front of this House Oversight Committee. We are learning information this morning that Sheriff McFadden confirmed he will, in fact, testify coming up on January the 22nd in front of said committee. And we have seen just the most recent House Oversight Committee, recent meetings chaired by Representative Brendan Jones. It most recently included members of the Orange County school board system, in which those individuals were lambasted for not following state law, for allowing inappropriate books in the classroom, in the libraries throughout that school system in Hillsborough. We just saw that back in the month of December, and it will be very interesting to see what comes forth on January the 22nd. At the same time, we've got another thread to this story. Representative Carla Cunningham, the Democrat out of Mecklenburg County, is one of multiple parties, including former members of the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Department, to sign on to a petition to remove the Mecklenburg County Sheriff. Part of the reason for removal, according to the petition, includes an attempted extortion and corruption, willful misconduct and maladministration in office, as well as willful and habitual refusal to perform the duties of the office. Representative Cunningham releasing a statement with the petition yesterday saying, no sheriff should ever suggest that a legislator's safety depends on how she votes. I was afraid and intimidated. It affected me, said Cunningham. This process exists for serious situations involving public trust, and the people of Mecklenburg County deserve transparency. Filing this complaint is part of rebuilding that trust. Trust in a fair process, trust in our institutions, and trust that concerns will be handled through proper channels such as dialogue and negotiation rather than silence and bullying. The petition asks a judge to remove sworn allegiances from Cunningham and other individuals, describing additional concerns about the operation of the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office. Under state law, that removal can occur only through a court process and only if the allegations are proven. The petition, which was also circulated yesterday, is relatively lengthy. It is more than 24 pages as it goes through some of the information, some of the issues that Democrat Representative Carla Cunningham, as well as 4 former members of the Mecklenburg County Sheriff, currently have with McFadden. It reads in part, since assuming the office of sheriff in December of 2018, McFadden has committed a wide range of misconduct in office that warrants his removal. This petition concerns the following general categories: misconduct related to conditions at the Mecklenburg County Center and Jail Administration, retaliation against crime victims and good faith whistleblowers, misuse of official resources, including violations of the Hatch Act, misconduct related to staffing and promotion practices, weaponization of the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office internal affair units against perceived enemies while squelching internal investigations into perceived allies, threats against the state legislator, which amount to attempted extortion and bribery. Those are just a couple of the details, a couple bits of the information in this verified petition for removal, which was filed yesterday. It does include former members of the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office, and it goes through, again, a lengthy detail on exactly what these 5 individuals are pushing for, which include, just looking through the entirety of this document, more than 140 different examples of which McFadden promoted some level of dereliction of duty while in office, officially asking for a judge to remove him from office as the Mecklenburg County Sheriff. Both of these things happening seemingly on parallel tracks at the exact same time. However, they are independent matters. The House Oversight Committee is more of an as baked into the name, an oversight committee. No real authority out of that committee. However, lawmakers, as you would imagine, will probably press McFadden pretty hard coming up here on January the 22nd. This petition removal coming out of Mecklenburg County, this is pretty serious, and it does have the ability, depending on how this shakes out throughout the legal process, to remove McFadden from office as the Mecklenburg County Sheriff. We will keep an eye on both of these details as things continue to unfold throughout the month of January. And at the same time, a third story as it relates to this, a Democrat primary challenger to Representative Cunningham has been endorsed by Democrat Governor Josh Stein. Reverend Dr. Ronnie Sadler has earned the endorsement of Josh Stein. Sadler is running against Carla Cunningham in the Democrat primary for North Carolina House District 106. This is not the first time in recent years that we have seen a Democrat governor endorsing a Democrat primary challenger to a sitting member of the North Carolina General Assembly. Representative Cunningham has voted multiple times with Republicans in the North Carolina General Assembly throughout the 2025 legislative session, including multiple key veto overrides passed by the General Assembly. That has prompted Democrat Governor Josh Stein and likely other Democrat groups to get involved in this process and endorse, presumably, what they feel to be a more progressive, more Democratic candidate that will not cross the aisle. So a little bit of political retaliation, it would appear, this morning for Representative Cunningham in Mecklenburg County for voting with Republicans on what they claim were common sense pieces of legislation vetoed by Governor Josh Stein. So 3 different threads that we're following this morning. We will keep you up to date with all of the information as that January the 22nd hearing rolls through. We will, of course, bring you all of the extensive details and information from that hearing. We'll have that coverage over on our website, carolinajournal.com, and, of course, right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:14 on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 WBT. We'll head back to the traffic center, get a look at the roadways on your Tuesday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you.
It's 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Tuesday morning to you. Some pretty big political news to kick off 2026 across North Carolina. For the first time ever in state history, there are now more registered Republicans than Democrats. To walk us through some of those details this morning, Dr. Andy Jackson from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Andy, for folks that read your work over at the John Locke Foundation, maybe they follow you on social media, this is something that is not out of the blue. You and many other folks have been projecting and predicting that this would happen in either late 2025 or early 2026. It's officially happened. What do you make of it?
Well, yeah, this did seem to be inevitable. I've been basically doing kind of a countdown, a watch, projecting how when this was going to happen. I don't think anybody doubted that it was going to happen. It's just a question of when. And this has been, an ongoing trend, really stretching back to the 1960s, but it took off during the Reagan administration, the 80s. And then, Republican numbers as a percentage-wise kind of stayed flat over the last couple of decades, but Democrats continued to plunge. And so this was inevitable, and we knew this was going to happen. The question is, what kind of impact will this have on the state going forward? That is a bit of an open question because unaffiliated voters are such a black box.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about that. We go back to 2010. Republicans take control of the North Carolina General Assembly, both chambers, for the first time in nearly 130 years, I think is the number off the top of my head. And since that period of time, Andy, we've seen the Republican majority shrink in the General Assembly back and forth. However, the GOP does still hold a majority in both chambers. But you bring up that a very interesting point. While there are more Republicans than Democrats, there's more unaffiliateds than both. And I think that puts the state of North Carolina in a very interesting position, especially as we move into an election later on this year.
It is. And, we have to remember that a lot of this transition has been kind of generational, and that also includes some of what we call in the old days the Jesse-crats. These are relatively conservative Democrats who often would vote across the aisle for Republicans. A lot of those folks are now gone, and they've been replaced by registered Republicans that vote Republicans. So in a certain sense, the electorate has only changed a little bit, even though the party registration relative to each other has changed a lot. With unaffiliateds, it's hard to predict. Now, there's a relatively small portion of those unaffiliateds that are really independent. Most of them are kind of soft partisans one way or another. If you look, and these are all public records, if you were to look up somebody's unaffiliated person's voter registration records and see how they voted, like which primary they vote in, most unaffiliateds will pick one or the other. There are very few kind of true switch hitters who will, I feel like voting in the Republican primary this year. And that generally is reflected in general election turnouts. We actually having less switch voting, less ticket splitting now than we did, say, 20 years ago. If you look, the difference between the most Republican race and the most Democratic race, with the exception of this last time around, because the governor's race was a little unusual, is actually shrinking. There was a time where you would have the gap between what happened in the president's race and the governor's race would be like 20 points. And now if it's, a 12-point difference, that's a big deal. And so it's strange. We have less ticket splitting, but as a whole, unaffiliateds are a little less predictable than either Republicans or Democrats.
And Andy, you mentioned the process that many unaffiliated voters will play out here in the coming weeks and months. Early voting starts February 12th. Primary election day rolls around March the 3rd of this year. We have a semi-closed, or some people call it a semi-open primary here in North Carolina. If you're a Republican, you vote in the Republican primary. If you're a Democrat, you vote in the Democrat primary. However, if you're an unaffiliated voter, you get to pick which one, not both, but one or the other to vote in. That's something that's changed in state law over the last couple of years. It's now mandated, but there are folks on both sides of the aisle, Andy, that argue we don't want these unaffiliated voters in our primary choosing our candidates.
Yeah, and that has been an argument. The reason that the parties adopted this once it became an option, Republicans did it first, and then Democrats a few years later, back in the 90s, was the belief that if you let these unaffiliated, and they were already a growing segment of the registrant, then if you let them in your process to vote in the primaries, then they become attached to the candidates, and they're more likely to vote for your side in the fall. So that's the argument, at least. The issue now is you have groups, and this seems to be a little more organized on the Democratic side, where they're trying to get their folks, or at least people on the left, trying to get their people involved in Republican primary politics. We've seen several issues of this, of where you have people, if you look at the registrations again, there are people that have been voting in Democratic primaries for years, and now they're registered as Republicans and running against Republican incumbents in several primaries here in North Carolina. The Democrats tried that against Madison Cawthorn in 2022. It didn't really work out for them because they were supporting a long shot candidate. Cawthorn lost, but not because of those crossover voters. But this is something that's ever present now, and this is a reason that some of the party stalwarts would really like to go back to a closed primary, so that only registered Republicans or registered Democrats can affect the nomination in their party contest.
Andy, as I understand it, some provisions in Senate Bill 747, which was a pretty wide-sweeping election bill that passed the General Assembly a couple of years ago, the only way that the parties could do that at this point would be to have the General Assembly change the state law. Is that how you understand it?
Yeah, that's how I understand it. I don't really know the motivation behind the legislators that wanted that. I think maybe it's kind of like, Cortez landed in Mexico and burnt all the boats. They're telling people, we're not going back. We're going to have these semi-open primaries. You're just going to have to get used to it. And so I don't expect this is going to change. This is the world that we live in North Carolina, where it really doesn't make a lot of sense unless you plan on running for office to register with one party or another. There's no real benefit to it. You just lose some flexibility when it comes time to voting in the primary. And, we have this kind of social tendency. This is a broader social phenomenon in America. People are not associating with organizations. The Knights of Columbus are shrinking. People are bowling alone, to use the book for Robert Putnam. And it's the same way with the parties. People don't want to affiliate with the party. There are some people who believe that you could potentially anger an employer or a business associate if they find out you're registered with the wrong party. And so it's a safer bet for folks to go ahead and register unaffiliated. And there's no upside really for most of us to register with a party.
More with Dr. Andy Jackson from the John Locke Foundation coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:29 on Charlotte's FM News Talk 107.9 WBT. We'll head back to the traffic center, get a look at the roadways on your Tuesday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. Good Tuesday morning.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM, WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We're joined this morning by Dr. Andy Jackson from the John Locke Foundation, talking about a pretty significant story in North Carolina politics. For the first time ever in state history, there are now officially more Republicans than Democrats registered across the Tar Heel state. Andy, when we look at this unaffiliated voter block, this does create some problems, however, for the parties and for the candidates, because you don't necessarily know whether you are going after a true Republican or true Democrat voter that's unaffiliated. As you noted, yes, you can pull up these individuals' voting records. It's all public information in North Carolina and see, but you could potentially be talking about doing that for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of voters, depending on the election that you're running for. There are things like propensity and affinity scores if you've got access to data systems to look at voters, but that's not the case for most smaller candidates. For example, a county commission or a school board race taking place in all 100 counties across North Carolina. That adds an interesting complexion to local elections from my vantage point.
Yeah, it definitely makes things harder. Now, when you get in the general election, you should at least in theory have access to your party's databases, which would incorporate that data. But it's not just the fact that you may not have access to it, but if you get access to it, if you're a smaller campaign, what are you going to do with that kind of data? You're busy knocking on doors, and you don't have maybe people on your campaign who know how to operate those kind of things. There's limits to what the local party can do to support their people. So this is more complex. And this is one of the ways where, as now Republicans start to expand their registration advantage, they may have an easier time in future elections. If they have a larger pool of people that they can reasonably expect will vote their way, if you just get them to the polls, at least initially, that's going to be an advantage for Republicans because they know who their people are. They don't have to go through all this data work to try to figure out which unaffiliateds are their unaffiliateds or go the other way. And plus, right now, Republicans have a higher turnout than Democrats, and both of those have a higher turnout than unaffiliated. And so if you are depending on unaffiliateds to save you, that's a risky proposition compared to having people that are your partisans and you know who they are. You just got to get them out.
Andy, you just kind of keyed off my next question here. You mentioned if Republicans are able to maintain this advantage and grow on it. Is that something that you would suspect would continue to happen here across North Carolina, as we talked about at the open here? So this is something that you and many others in the North Carolina political sphere have been watching and predicting for quite some time. Do things continue on this track? Do Democrats start seeing an uptick now that this news is out? Where do you lay it out there?
Yeah, I expect that the Republican advantage will continue. The Democrats generally, and the stereotype is generally true here, Democrats depend on younger voters. Younger voters are more likely to register as unaffiliated. And so once again, they're having to put that kind of unsteady ballast in their boat. And so I'm expecting Republicans will continue to grow their advantage as far as registrations go. And it's just going to make it easier for them on the get out the vote effort. But the flip side of this, though, is that it could change. There could be events. There was a steady growth of Republicans for a couple of decades. And during the Barack Obama campaign, you saw this large rush of new Democratic registrations in 2008. And so events could take over, things could change. But at least under current situation, for the foreseeable future, I'm expecting the Republican advantage to continue to grow. One interesting thing is we do have these pre-registrations that are starting to come online over the next few weeks. These are teenagers who had registered, and as long as they turn 18 before the general election, they're allowed to vote. Now, I happened to vote my first election when I was 17 in the 1986 Republican primary. I'm dating myself there a little bit, but you can do that in North Carolina. We will have 17-year-olds voting in this primary, perfectly legal as long as you turn 18 before the general election. Now, will this save the Democrats? Will we see like a little mini flip before it goes back? That's an interesting question because presumably younger people are a little more likely to vote Democratic. So we might see a mini flip back, but it's going to revert to norm. And I expect probably for years to come, Republicans will grow that advantage.
And you talk about these younger voters, and Andy, this has been something that a lot of data analysts and political scientists have been really watching over the last 10 or 15 years or so, is the shift in some of those younger voters. And it's almost, you can look at it almost based on where individuals live and kind of where they grew up. You've got pockets where the youth is way more conservative than generations past. In other parts of the country and in other areas, seeing almost the complete polar opposite. So to see these individuals involved and getting them in this political process is especially going to be interesting to see as we head into, what are traditionally, unfortunately, very low turnout elections like primaries that we'll likely see coming up here in March. Obviously, the general will have a much larger race at the top of the ticket, a Senate race with the former Democrat governor and Roy Cooper on it. So turnout probably will be a little bit higher, but the primary turnout numbers typically are always abysmal across North Carolina.
Yeah, you're really looking around the 20 percentile, maybe up to 40, depends on if you have a really, really exciting race. So yeah, it's going to be low. Now, Gen Z is less, and Gen Alpha when they come online, is considerably less progressive than the millennials. And if you look at just male voters, Gen Z tends to be a little more conservative. And so there are those kind of generational fluctuations, though, that to kind of buck that overall trend of younger people being more progressive, older people, as you get, different life experiences, more conservative. But that generally holds true. So if we get this new generation, this Gen Z, and they're pretty moderate. I mean, they're once again closer to Republicans than millennials were, and then they go through those life experiences, start paying taxes, having children, those kind of things that tend to make people more conservative over their lifetime. As they start experiencing that, you potentially have the most conservative generation since at least Gen X, and maybe going back even further.
There's obviously going to be a lot to watch here in North Carolina. We'll keep an eye on all of these elections as they come forward. Andy's got some really great stuff that you can read over on our website this morning, johnlocke.org. We appreciate the information and insight this morning. Dr. Andy Jackson joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:43 on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM WBT. We'll head back to the traffic center, get another look at the roadways with the great, the legendary, the industrial, as I've been told, Boomer Von Cannon.
All of the eyes.
Yes.
Man, thank you, Nick.
Good morning again. It's 5:50. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on Charlotte's FM News Talk 107.9 WBT. Reaction is continuing to flow into North Carolina over what was a busy news weekend as the United States conducted military and law enforcement operations Saturday morning that led to the arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cecilia Flores. Maduro was indicted in the United States in 2020 and faces 4 charges, including narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, as well as conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. The reaction was pretty quick as Congressman David Rouzer, the Republican out of North Carolina's 7th Congressional District, praised the operation, calling Maduro illegitimate. Rouzer said in a statement, Nicolás Maduro's capture and transport to the United States is a win for the freedom in Venezuela and justice for America. Maduro is an indicted illegal dictator, which is an important distinction. President Trump's leadership is sending a clear message to those seeking to harm the United States. Regimes that flood our communities with illegal drugs, fuel cartel violence, and undermine U.S. security will be held accountable. President Trump's decisive actions put American safety first and provides a real opportunity for stability, freedom, and a democratic future for Venezuela. However, not all of the reaction was positive. Democrats nationwide condemned the actions of President Trump, with Congressman Alma Adams, the Democrat out of North Carolina's 12th Congressional District, calling the president's actions unconstitutional. She said in a statement, President Trump deployed U.S. troops and launched strikes in Venezuela without congressional authority, utterly violating the United States Constitution. The War Powers Resolution only allows for unilateral presidential action in response to an imminent threat facing American citizens or service members. He failed to offer any proof of that threat, failed to brief and seek constitutionally required approval from Congress, and once again failed to put the American people first. Pretty standard line there from Democrat Alma Adams. That was some of the similar commentary from Democrats nationwide as these operations confirmed by President Donald Trump Saturday morning were carried out in part by Joint Special Operation Command, the JSOC, including members of Delta Force. That organization or entity is headquartered at Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, formerly known as Fort Liberty. President Trump changed the name back to Fort Bragg. So some North Carolina operators are potentially involved in the successful military and police operations taking place on Saturday. United States Senator Ted Budd also jumping in on the conversation, saying Nicolás Maduro was an illegitimate dictator who had long been wanted in the United States on charges of narco-terrorism, corruption, and drug trafficking. The president's decisive action to capture and bring him to justice is monumental, not just for ending his brutal regime in Venezuela, but will save countless American lives from deadly drugs his thugs have brought to our shores. These actions are within the president's Article 2 authority and sends a clear message to America's enemies that our nation will not allow threats to our safety and security to continue unchecked. God bless our Special Service Operation Forces who carried out this daring mission, the Air Force, all of those within our armed forces and intelligence community who provided support. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his team have done great work to make this possible and have our federal law enforcement officials who have worked for years to build this case. The United States government has already recognized the Venezuelan opposition, and we can all hope for freedom and prosperity for the Venezuelan people who have long suffered under the weight of Maduro's oppression. That's the commentary from United States Senator Ted Budd. Congressman Tim Moore also commenting, emphasizing the skill of the United States military and special operators, some from North Carolina in all likelihood, carrying out the precise mission, saying Nicolás Maduro was indicted in 2020 for narco-terrorism and weapons trafficking against the United States, and now justice is being carried out. He has been responsible for flooding our streets with deadly drugs and violence that claimed countless American lives. That ends today. in a precise U.S. military operation with no American lives or equipment lost. This brutal dictator was captured and will finally face accountability on American soil. This mission reflects the unmatched skill of our armed forces and the strength of President Trump's leadership on the world's stage. Monday afternoon in court, Nicolás Maduro and his wife pled not guilty to these charges. They did not seek any sort of bond, and his next scheduled court appearance is slated for March the 17th. So unless something dramatically changes in the next 2 months or so, Maduro will remain in U.S. custody. It's not clear where exactly he will be held, whether it will be in New York or somewhere else throughout the country. But another court date for the former Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro and his wife is scheduled for March the 17th. They pled not guilty to the charges on Monday in court. You can read additional commentary and quotes from lawmakers here across the state of North Carolina. We've got those quotes over on our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. That story's headline, North Carolina reacts to Maduro's arrest. Recapping some pretty big statewide news this morning, the Mecklenburg County Sheriff in Gary McFadden has been requested in front of a House General Assembly Oversight Committee coming up on January the 22nd. The letter from Representative Jake Johnson, Brendan Jones, and Harry Warner requests the Mecklenburg County Sheriffs to be seen in front of their committee to discuss the office and the role within his role within Mecklenburg County, including a discussion of the Charlotte Area Transportation System, or CATS. The sheriff is also asked to be prepared to discuss strategic plans, including spending, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and other topics that lawmakers deem as appropriate. McFadden will be appearing in front of this House Oversight Committee January the 22nd at 9 p.m. This came down the same day that Democrat Representative Carla Cunningham in the North Carolina General Assembly, she, one of the Democrat representatives in Mecklenburg County, signed on to a legal petition to remove McFadden from office. This is still a very dynamic and fluid situation. Continued coverage throughout the day right here on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 FM WBT. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 WBT.